Welcome to Conservative Voices Talking Points. I'm your host, David Adams. In this episode, we will cover a hot-button topic currently in America, the 1619 Project. We understand that topics such as this can sometimes bring about heated debate and even arguments. That is not our intention here on Conservative Voices Talking Points. Our intention each episode is to inform our viewers with factually backed conservative viewpoints that can lead to a practical application in modern society. We hope you enjoy. The 1619 Project is an essay written by Waterloo, Iowa native Nicole Hannah Jones and is associated with the New York Times and New York Times Magazine. Since its release in 2019, it has sparked controversy from the standpoint of historical facts, dates, and events, and along political lines. This essay has even been converted to a curriculum for teachers and students provided by the Pulitzer Center. Now, I'd like to introduce our panelists, Eric Branstad, Gentry Collins, and Rob Mudd. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Let's get started. The 1619 Project states openly that it, and I quote, aims to reframe the country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of our national narrative, unquote. Before we get into the specifics of this essay, Gentry, what are some of the dangers of something, 1619 Project or anything else, that is designed specifically to reframe the U.S. history?
Well, we're reframing U.S. history in ideological terms, not in historical terms. So that would be the first danger. I think of other historical examples where history was retold and was retold for ideological reasons. I mean, you think about the Bolsheviks, for example, being one of the more modern examples of that ended tragically, horrifically. I think that anytime we're dealing with putting one group, one subset of our demography in the center of American history, we're denying the centrality of the idea that is America, that we're all created equal, that we're all equal in the eyes of the law, and that we all have equal opportunity under the law. That's the story of American history at its best, and that's what should be central in our telling of American history.
All right. Rob, can you give us some examples? Here I am coming to you about media, right? Mm-hmm. Of the media giving preference and maybe even just benefit of the doubt to liberal individuals and ideas versus the other side.
The first thing that comes to mind is Hunter Biden and the scandal that was never reported prior to the election. I think that's hypocrisy to the highest extent. We all saw what they did with Trump Jr. when he met with a Russian gal up at Trump Tower, and how they've made him the next cosmonaut from Russia, which wasn't the case at all. And then when Hunter Biden's situation arises and his laptop, there was no time put into the dig in deep to be journalists on that subject until after his father won the presidential or was deemed winner of the presidential race. So I think that's the hypocrisy in big media and big tech. And they're all owned by the same people, and they skew it.
So Gentry, back to you, based on what you said and where the media comes in with information, would you consider reframing history to be the same as omitting information?
Well, it certainly crowds out information, doesn't it? When we ask history to be taught from an ideological perspective, any ideological perspective, rather than teaching the facts of history, then of course you're going to crowd things out. Is that intentionally exclusionary? I don't know, David, but it certainly practically is exclusionary.
I would suggest it is on purpose, right? Because where do they get the ability to reframe history and have a microphone to speak it unless they had media, the Main Street media? So Gentry, I do think they are colluding big media and the ability to reframe history, because if you don't have a platform to espouse your views on it, you can't reframe. Mm-hmm. So not to interrupt, but I think you're right. I think they are in collusion together. So continue.
Yeah, no, I think they're definitely in collusion. I mean, look, we'll, I'm sure, talk over time about Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, in which he says that the only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination, right? It is a vile idea. I guess the question now is whether they intend to exclude other bits. I think probably the answer is yes, they do. Whether they intend for it or don't intend for it, my point is that they are excluding the important ideas of American history. And the idea that they're excluding that's most dangerous, I think, is the idea that the American experiment has produced extraordinary results. And it has produced the most extraordinary results for the poorest in our society. And so I think when you try to reframe American history from a point of view that says that it's defined by its most evil moment or its most evil component, boy, you really are excluding a whole big wide swath of the reality of American history that ought to be told.
All right, let's shift gears. Eric, this question's for you. This project as a whole, the 1619 Project with New York Times, includes many other writers, right? Nicole Hannah-Jones was the first initial essay writer, but there are pieces written that attribute all kinds of things, several things in American history to have derived from or at least been heavily influenced by slavery. A few of those things are capitalism, our prison system, even, this might sound silly, but it's very serious, even to America's sugar-fueled diets. Eric, it seems like some Americans can always point the finger at others to blame, right? Can you tell us how anyone can conclude that slavery in America's past is somehow to blame for things that happened in 2021?
I love you for being you, and I love you for being you, and you for being you, and you for being you. And that's where we have gotten off track, is that we are trying to set, really, it's causing further racial divide. And now we are starting to see people for their color versus their accomplishments. And I think what it comes down to for me, as far as in this particular topic, is I see those problems with capitalism and the prison system and where their viewpoints are, but I want to get to really the root cause, I think, and that is we've lost personal responsibility. Responsibility is an important lesson that I've had to teach my kids. It's an important lesson that I had to learn myself as a young man and young adult, is taking responsibility, and you are responsible for the choices that you make. So I really think it's those lessons in responsibility is how I look at this question, is showing that we need to be responsible for ourselves, and we need to take responsibility for our actions. I think that's the root cause, and my sugar-fueled diet will I have been responsible for,
right,
and fixed it in the right way.
So you're saying personal responsibility takes precedence over anything to do with race.
Exactly.
Right? Just kind of being clear, and not trying to be facetious at all, right? There are people in America that truly believe that these problems within certain areas, like we mentioned, capitalism, prison system, and others, exist maybe not solely because, but at least in part because of slavery, racial divides in our past. We could make jokes, we could laugh about that, but there are people that truly believe. Gentry, what would be your response to someone who truly has it in their mind that they can't maybe overcome something because of their past or because of their predecessors' past?
What a terrific question, an important question for conservatives. I had a chance in our last episode to talk about what really are the exceptional results from the American experiment. That after 5,000 years of recorded human history that saw average life expectancy globally stagnate at about 30, maybe 35 in some places and sometimes, that today our global life expectancy is more than 70 years old. And that within those 70 years, our people are living more fulfilling lives and lives of plenty, right? We talked last time about the idea that we'll lose more of our poor in America this year to diseases of excess, like heart disease, diabetes, preventable stroke, and so forth. And that these advancements are unique in all of human history. Those are the things that come from an American history that is driven by the rule of law, that is driven by equality of opportunity under the law, and that for all of our warts and flaws through our history, and certainly there have been, like any human institution, there are issues, but that what defines American history is one of the most breathtaking economic and human success stories in all of recorded history. That needs to be told, because when we tell it, I think it opens the door for young people to say, you know what, I can follow that pathway too. I can take charge of my own life. I can chart a better pathway, and only in America can I do that.
One of our points or topics that we'll discuss later on, but we're going to tackle it now, is education. Taking what you just said, Gentry, right back to you. You mentioned on the last show, and you alluded to it as well, about bringing people out of poverty. What is it doing to Americans, to Iowans, especially at the youth level, right? If you've got a system of government that for the past 100 years has brought people up out of poverty, and now we're teaching them that maybe you can't come out of poverty because of something that you can't even help. I don't want to put any kind of words into the 1619 essays that were written, but if this were to go to public schools, and Eric will come to here in a minute, but the question I'm asking is the counter, the absolute difference between telling a kid, essentially, youth, that you can be anything you want, right, through hard work, perseverance, and some intelligence, versus 1619 says we're struggling because of our past.
We don't have to look very far around modern human experience around the globe to find the end result of behavior like that. You think about, for example, the hundreds or even thousands of years of grievance being exchanged in the Middle East that lead to this day to violence on the basis of ethnicity, and based on nothing more than ethnicity. When we divide people by ethnicity, we minimize their human potential. When we say that the American ideal is open for you, equality of opportunity in the eyes of the law, equality of opportunity in our economy, and an America where the future is open to you if you'll exert yourself and take responsibility for your actions, that is transformational in all of history. When we stop teaching that, then we know what happens, because we have 5,000 years of recorded human history where in every time when we did something like that, we revert back to a violent mean, that is an average mean, I intend to say, that sees violence, that sees despair, that sees a return to deprivation. And that is not a pathway that we want to put America on.
Understood. Next question for you, Eric. Just sort of that in mind, let's bring it to Iowa, right? Beginning in February, I believe, of this legislative season, through at least April of this year, Iowa legislature was highlighted in part for HF 222, which would, in several things, ban the teaching of 1619 Project in public schools throughout the state. Eric, where does it stand currently, and what do you see as the future of teaching within public schools in Iowa?
So House File 222 got out of House subcommittee and really went nowhere following that. I think a lot could be attributed to some of that negative media that they were getting from it. And then they did, however, ban the critical race theory in the institutions. That was signed, and that's now law. I think the legislators that I spoke to, even before coming here today, the parents and the real outcry from across Iowa, having this very same conversation that we're having here today, talking about, the history of the United States, and it certainly overwhelmingly in our Iowa legislature was listened to and responded to exactly where Iowans' voices are at.
So in the last episode, we talked a little bit about next steps. Rob, you brought up, and Eric, you touched on it as well, about locally people getting involved, being active, letting their voice be heard. Sounds like that's happening, right, at the local level, right? School council meetings, people phoning in or sending emails to their principals or school administrators. I've seen it in the news. I can't cite anybody right now or any markets that have done that, but I know it's happening across the country for that matter. What would you respond to, both Eric and Rob, as far as what we talked about last time, being locally involved and what you're seeing just in this little bit? And we could talk about critical race theory. Here's a plug. It'll be on the next episode. But as far as any kind of curriculum, which we'll get into in a little bit as well, that pulls away from the true American experience, or an American experiment, I should say, and the success of America, and tries to push something else in that goes against potentially the ideals and beliefs. So from a local level, what have you seen?
Well, I'd like to take it one step back Dave. The concept of a utopian society and judging America against that, I think, can only lead to disgruntled people or groups of people, because there is no utopian society. There is no perfect universe. There is no standard that never has erred. But to be judged against that, we're always going to lose. So I get confused with what they're trying to, they're trying to make better against what standard of measurement? Because what I have seen and others at this table is that Gentry spoke to it earlier, the exceptionalism in the United States, the great experiment, Biden said it was the great idea, but the great experiment is nothing has come close to it. So I'm not sure what they're judging.
So we don't know where the bar is.
The bottom or the top. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Eric, back to you from a local standpoint. I guess I'm asking, what would you encourage people to do? Again, you mentioned some things on the previous episode, but when it comes to the education of our children, right? The young people coming up here in Iowa, what would be the steps for a parent and group to take?
Well, it really, fortunately, it gets down to that grassroots local level. I mean, down to your school, your city council, your mayor. And with such a divided country right now, it's so important that we speak up at our schools, at our city hall meetings, and that we share our feelings and our concerns. These are our kids. I've got 4 girls. Trust me, I am spending time with their principals and with their school leaders, making sure that they're getting the education. I'm investing in I'm investing in my kids, and I'm here to support them. I want to know what's going on, and I want to be able to be a voice, and hopefully a helpful voice to their schools and to the kids. So it's absolutely important that we speak up and civilly and understanding to get it done.
I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to add, I think there's a great indicator coming up later this year in school board elections. David, there are school board elections coming up in many municipalities around the state this year, not next. And I am seeing a trend towards competitive school board elections, multiple candidates filing, candidates of all kinds of different levels of background and experience that have never run for office before, that haven't necessarily been your activists. And I think we're seeing that in a lot of Iowa school districts. I think it'd be very interesting to see this fall how many places where school board elections are normally not even contested have multi-way races for those seats and very hot, passionate races for those seats. And it'll also be interesting to see what turnout looks like for those. Normally pedestrian kind of elections where turnout is much, much lower than general elections. My guess is that you'll see very high turnout for some of those. Some of that driven by COVID protocols and the mishandling of COVID by a lot of schools, but some of it driven by the divisive racial ideology that is being used to reframe American history in our schools today. So I think you will see this year, you'll see both a whole new slate of candidates, as well as a whole new level of turnout in school board elections that we have not seen in Iowa in recent years.
Gentry, I had a question for you. Do you believe that progressives are more organized when it comes to local school boards because of the teachers' unions?
Yes, because of teachers' unions, and not only because of teachers' unions, but because of the influence of national money.
Yeah.
I think that the left does a better job of the right in terms of investing real, meaningful resources in down-ballot races.
So speaking of education, Gentry, right back to you. Recently, the Pulitzer Center created a 1619 project curriculum for both teachers and students. It's free to everyone. The materials, everything is free to all. Can you give kind of an insight on how conservatives view education? You might have already partially answered this just previously, but can you give an insight on how conservatives view education? What should be available? What shouldn't be available?
Number one, I think that parents are the primary educators of their kids. I think conservatives have always believed that and believe that still, that the primary responsibility and frankly the primary accountability should rest with parents. I think one of the many things that we see in education today that's troubling is increasingly we see efforts among school boards and administrators to hide from parents what's being taught in the classroom. Right, there are a number of prominent examples of that just here in Iowa. Though I would say in Iowa we still have some of the better public schools in the country. So we're wrestling with that even here. So number one, for our younger kids, I think that we have to respect the role of parents. Number two, and more broadly perhaps, I would suggest that the purpose of education is to empower the student at some point in their life to have a meaningful, productive adult life. Productive both in terms of their family and personal life, productive in terms of their economic life. And so I think we've got to be very focused on recalibrating education to successful outcomes for young adults. That in addition to other things, I think means helping kids learn how to think critically. What it does not mean, explicitly what it does not mean, is reframing American history through an ideological lens. That public education should not be a means to ideological indoctrination.
When you're teaching young people, whether that be elementary, high school, college-age kids, when you're teaching them that their circumstances that they had no control over determined their outcome. You've touched on this before, that when we talk about equality versus equity, it kind of goes back to that they want everything to be even because they've been taught the 1619 Project is fact, that America was founded upon slavery. It wasn't founded upon slavery. It was founded because people wanted religious freedom.
Slavery is not an American institution.
No,
it's ugly, evil, immoral in every place it exists. Period. And yet, it's not an American institution. It was globally accepted nearly every place on the earth at one point in time or another. America was founded, as you say, on a desire for liberty, specifically religious liberty, but then extending into other forms. And what that has produced is extraordinary. The idea that we are a merit-based culture, that you can come here from any other place and become an American, that you can add something of value to the culture, but that we value the scientific method, we value objective truth. This is exactly what has driven us to so many innovations, right?
I can't also believe that all of these folks that are trying to come up through our southern border want to then place roots in a place that is so terribly ran or based off such terrible things that the 1619 article states that it is.
If we're so bad,
maybe they
why are
didn't
we
get
the
the
magnet,
memo.
Of the
Right?
world.
Yeah.
So there is no memo. It's all BS. It's all make believe.
I'd like to know. For the CRT people and the BLM people that claim that the scientific method is self-racist, which is one of the things enumerated on their site. I'd like to know how many of them are going to a doctor that doesn't believe in science. I want to know how many of them want to go to a surgeon when their life is on the line, whose education was defined by 1619.
Their own truth.
Their own
Truth.
Yeah. My own truth is that you're doing fine.
That you did get an A, not an F in medical
My
school.
truth is that I'm not going to be in pain tonight. But
Right.
how's that doing for you?
Right.
So I don't. This whole idea is just absurd.
It is absurd, and that seems to be the play call of the day, the absurdity. How far can we get to the absurd to where no one understands what is the truth, right?
I do think, my own sort of bias here is that we need to avoid the pitfall of simply opposing what they put out there. Yes, it's wrong. Yes, it's evil. Yes, we could do 10 shows on what they're screwing up. And yet, I think we have an obligation here to say, wait a minute, we don't just oppose what these people want to do, that we want to take you to a better place. There is a future for every American that can be achieved with conservative ideals. Frankly, with American ideas. And I don't, every problem that comes up, we want to go attack that problem, myself included. I think we need to find a way also to say, hey, wait a minute, it's not just that we oppose these clowns, there's something better for you.
Of course, right.
We're not putting our own, 1776, I would like to show the things that our 1770, I'm making this up, our 1776 history is this, and this would be taken away, this history would be taken away if 1619 were allowed.
I wish I'd asked
Well,
that
so
question.
1619 really professes victimhood, right? And what we have been taught is that America is the land of freedom and ideas. Well, that's the difference, the complete opposite of being a victim. A victim doesn't have opportunity. A victim doesn't see things of what could be. A victim says, hey, I got screwed, right? I'm being oppressed. I don't have any outlet to do anything more than what I'm told to do. And that's just not the case.
Rob, where else in the world were reliable vaccines for COVID developed?
Well, if you live in Russia, then you have to believe that Russia created them, and if you live in China, you have to believe that China created them.
We're giving
but they're
them away
here
by
in the United States.
half of billions, aren't we?
We can't give them away fast enough, right?
Right.
That the world depends on
us.
Same with Silicon Valley. Same with sending a man to the moon. Same with curing polio. Same with, I mean, this set of ideas has yielded something that is transformational in human history.
I spent 4th of July with my father, my brother, out in South Dakota, Spearfish, South Dakota, going to a rally. And one of the people that we met at this rally was a woman from Bulgaria. And she was there to one, to defend the ideals of America, and two, to speak of the atrocities of communism and the signs of communism that she says are here today. And, you know, the scary thing is we have to wait to be in the worst possible predicament before anybody will do anything, right? Gee, I don't want to be an armchair quarterback and say, I told you so. But it's like that's the position they want to put us in, right? Take us all the way down to decimation, and then what are we going to do? I told you so. And I don't. That's not a good position to fight from. I don't think the "I told you so" position, because that means it's already gone bad.
I think that's a different way of saying what I'm trying to say. If all we do is oppose this thing on the way, we're a few minority voices out in the wilderness, and nobody. I think the way to have something else is to get people to come follow you to a better place. And
they will follow. Yeah. I believe they will. For one, I don't believe the numbers. I don't, and I'm sure you guys don't believe them. Their ideas aren't what got us here today, and I can't believe for the life of me that the majority of people believe what they have to say. I believe that the people that control the media would like us to believe, or others to believe, that this great idea is a fake. The real fake is them, but that's the only thing they have to sell.
So elaborate a little bit more. Any of you, Gentry, just mentioned that we don't need to do this. Tell us what we do need to do. And I know last episode we talked about, okay, be a voice, create an audience, and then tell the truth. But when it comes to this, Eric mentioned be a part of your grassroots, right? Go to school board meetings, vote in the upcoming elections. What's the next step?
Look, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. Right? I raised that when we were filming for a reason. I think it's true.
So rock it hard and keep rocking.
Yeah. Why aren't we? So this is exactly what I'm talking about. We watch people like 1619 come and distort American history, and do so for ideological reasons, not to tell a bigger truth, not to improve people's lives, but to assign blame, to divide us, right? Instead of simply opposing it, why aren't conservatives out saying, you know what, here is a better piece of curriculum to explain the power of American free enterprise. Here is a piece of historical curriculum about what American capitalism has produced. Now, if you want to examine the flaws in capitalism or income disparities or any of the other, fine, but then let's make sure we view those through a global historical context. That those disparities that lead our poorest to be dying of diseases of excess, right, really are, where else would you rather be?
Here.
Would you rather be in Venezuela?
No.
Where, a couple of years ago, the average Venezuelan adult, after we tried socialism again, lost something like 18 or 20 pounds in a year, not because they went on an exercise regime, but because of deprivation. Right, we're tipping back over towards where is the educational content around that? Where is the educational content that says, hey, wait a minute, America is not an exceptional place simply because we're red, white, and blue. America's an exceptional place because of an idea.
And the people that lived to that idea.
And the people that lived that idea that yielded something for the people around them. right? That love, Eric and I were talking about this on the way up. Love, we don't talk about it enough in politics, or when we do, we talk about a very narrow form. But love, classically defined, is an act of the will, and it is specifically to will the good of the other. You want to love your neighbor, then you need to double down on long-held American ideals that are the only set of ideals that have actually produced something positive for your neighbor, right? And so why we need to be in the business of being out and doing what they're doing, but doing so with integrity, doing so with love, and not doing so simply through an ideological lens that says, well, we want to divide, and we want to assign blame for historical injustices, and no. The historical injustice would be reverting to the kinds of cultures that we had for 5,000 years that saw mass deprivation and death at the age of 30 on average around the globe, right?
Yeah.
That's injustice.
That's injustice.
So let's not do that.
I'm going to give a quote from Vice President Harris. She stated, specific to the 1619 Project, she said, quote, "The 1619 Project is a powerful and necessary reckoning of our history. We cannot understand and address the problems of today without speaking truth about how we got here," unquote. Taking what Gentry just said, the steps that need to be taken, the parents' involvement, teachers, whether in Iowa or outside of Iowa, maybe hiding the curriculum that's being taught. Why is it that media and some news companies aren't questioning Vice President Harris on her statement here, or questioning the reasoning behind it? Essentially, why aren't they questioning the why?
I don't know why they're not questioning the why. I don't know why Vice President Harris has the ability to question and state that our history is incorrect. She wasn't around for it, right? I mean, so whose opinion counts, which I think is dangerous. So how does she getting away with it? She's getting away with it by big media. I mean, some of these ideas would never exist unless the collusion effort of the big six in media and then the big five in technology are working together to promote something that isn't real.
So let me bring it back away from politics. Obviously, we focus on politicians, the political side of things, but let's talk about someone in Hollywood. Oprah Winfrey, this was a couple of years ago, I believe stated, and forgive me, I'm paraphrasing, but only you can find your truth. Speak about the danger of that. Anyone can respond to the danger of that, but also, Rob, specific to you, why there isn't someone in media that questions, what do you mean by that?
Because I think I really truly believe that the media is controlled by a very few powerful groups. In traditional media, you've got News Corp, Time Warner, Comcast, Viacom, Disney. They control the media. And who controls those folks? Well, Wall Street controls those folks. And when you look into who in Wall Street controls it, it comes down to about three different entities that control hedge funds, the money, where we're putting the money. So there is a plan. There's a global reset that folks wanted to take us down that path. And I think it's being controlled by the progressives, by the Democrats, by big tech, by big media, legacy media, colluding to all be on the same talking points as it comes to education, our history, the society problems today are all generated from certain, I guess us, right-wing people. So to me, I believe that there's I don't want to use the word conspiracy because that isn't the right word. It's factual. I'm not making this stuff up. These companies own these entities that we utilize on a daily basis to get our news. And if they're controlled by the same people with the same ideology, this is what you end up with. And it's dangerous,
Gentry,
as we all know.
Yeah, I'm addressed to you. Speaking of politicians, we mentioned VP Harris, we mentioned Oprah Winfrey. There are people out there that think that every individual can control their own truth, that they have to believe what's being stated. There aren't questions as to why this is a powerful and necessary reckoning of history. It's just a statement and run with. Explain the danger of that.
Well, the lack of objective truth is something that you need to claim and try to establish in the American culture in order to claim that we're defined by the things that they want to define us by. If you limit yourself to objective truth, then you define the American success story as one that lifts people up, not one that subjugates them or keeps them down. I think philosophically this is a problem beyond just Oprah Winfrey and the mainstream media. The idea that we all define our own truth is I think, chipping away at the foundation that we can share a basis in fact, which then leads you to principles like merit, earned credit, being able to make relative judgments about what are good ideas and what are not good ideas, what are ideas that are productive and fruitful in our lives, and what are ideas that are not. And so I think this idea that we all have our own truth is foundational to the left's narrative today and is extraordinarily dangerous to
Do you
a
think that
flourishing
the
society.
reason they push that your own truth is because the principles of the conservatives believe in the foundation that we were founded on Judeo-Christian beliefs?
Most
And
conservatives believe in absolute truths. That's fact, right?
Correct.
Versus
or objective truth?
exactly versus go find your own truth.
Yeah.
And that then builds on confusion, because if everybody's got their own truth, what is the truth? And that's what I see today with media and these new differing opinions on our history, is to confuse people. It can't be anything else, is confusion. And confusion then brings fear. And then when you have fear, you're able to manipulate and control. And that's what I see. I see the progressives wanting to control. And how do you control? You control through fear.
So let me bring this kind of back into 1619 and touch on exactly what you're talking about. There's an individual named Leslie Harris, history professor at Northwestern University. This individual was in contact with both the New York Times editor at the time and the author of 1619 Project, Nicole Hannah-Jones, regarding fact-checking. Leslie Harris wrote an article in Politico stating that the Times, New York Times, ignored her concerns and historical data that went against certain aspects of the essay's claims. One, I'd ask, anybody heard of that? Anybody heard of, this person? And I'm asking somewhat facetiously, right? But the claims that are out there, I hadn't heard of them until I dug a little bit deeper, right? Gentry, question for you. We seem to be in an era when truth, is determined by whoever is loudest and seemingly most passionate. We talked last episode about the emotional decision-making, the crisis mode mentality. In 2019, and this is somewhat comical, in 2019, Democratic Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stated that what many people assumed from liberals, that being morally right is more important than being factually right. We spoke last episode on people's emotions clouding their judgment. Can you elaborate on how this is happening in the reframing of American history?
You can't be morally right without being factually right when we talk about America's history. You can't be morally right when you get the facts wrong about the yield of the American experiment. That the American experiment, as we have discussed, has lifted more people out of poverty, violence, disease, despair, hunger, has created more progress and more prosperity for more people, especially the poorest in our culture, than any other set of governing ideas, than any other set of economic ideas in all of recorded human history. And if you don't get those facts right, then I don't know how you can possibly be right on the moral principle that we have an obligation to lift the next generation of Americans up. So we want to get rid of those facts and yet say, well, we're somehow morally right because why? Because, well, you have your truth, I have my truth. That's why it's such a dangerous idea that we lose sight of the truth of the facts of American history. No one here claims, and no conservative claims, that any human institution, let alone the United States of America, is free from sin, is free from warts and flaws and things in our history that shouldn't be there. And yet to say that we are defined by our worst sins is not only factually incorrect, it is morally incorrect as well.
Excellent. So in each episode, we're going to allow for our panelists to give their closing remarks, whether having anything to do today with 1619 Project or otherwise. Rob, we're going to start with you. Closing remarks, sir.
Closing remarks, I fall back on the narrative being controlled by the media, who controls the media, and then what is their attempt to change what we believe to be our history, what we believe to be uniquely American, and who we're judging and what standard of benchmark we use to judge that. I think there's evil out amongst us, and it's a spiritual evil, and it is taking shots at the fabric of America, and we have to identify it and speak to it, that is the challenge.
All right. Eric, closing remarks, sir.
I never thought we would be in this spot that we're in right now, where our voices are silenced. We are being pushed back. We are being pushed to the side, and there's not even a way to get our voices out. If I try to do something on Facebook or Twitter, getting taken off or getting, like we've seen with President Trump and many other Republican leaders, it's so important that we are able to get that voice back. Being a part of this show, being a part of this great panel is absolutely a way to do that. And I look forward to being a bigger voice and a stronger voice, and to push back against those who are trying to silence us.
Gentry.
We talked about Pulitzer's involvement in the 1619 Project and in creating content for students and classrooms. I wanted to say that there should be a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. And yet that would be too soft a way to say it. There ought to be a Pulitzer Prize for the horror genre here. What they're trying to do in reframing American history through an ideological lens, not through a factual lens, not even through a morally acceptable lens, but through an ideological lens. What they're trying to do is to be the proverbial hand that rocks the cradle, right? The old William Ross Wallace poem, "The hand that rocks the cradle rules the world." What this movement has done, and we'll talk about critical race theory next time, but what critical race theory says, among other things, is that we need to get rid of the nuclear family. Why would you? That poem, by the way, "The Hand That Rocks the Cradle," was written in praise of motherhood, right? Motherhood as the great and preeminent agent of change in the world. And so we're trying to get rid of that. We're trying to replace it with something else, right? Why are we trying to get rid of it? Because no mother in their right mind, no father in their right mind would let this be taught in our schools, much less in their homes. So the idea that Pulitzer is trying to advance this in our schools, I think deserves a Pulitzer Prize for horror.
Oh, thank you, gentlemen. And thank you, our viewers, for once again tuning into Conservative Voices Talking Points. We'll see you next time.